Gas masks and hand grenades. Gas masks and hand grenades. Gas masks and hand grenades. Gas masks and hand grenades.
Hey, what is happening, YouTube and everybody out there? Welcome to Gas Masks and Hand Grenades. It is I, your host, Jeff, and look who I've got here. I'm going to screw this. Oh, I got it right. It's not the mirror opposite, so there we go. I've got Mr. Scott Burns with me and Mr. David Gehlke here tonight, and we are going to be talking about this book right here, which I guess came out in November. Am I correct about that? The beginning of November, right?
That is correct, Jeff. Yes.
Okay. We're going to talk about the Scott Burns Sessions, A Life in Death Metal, 1987 to 1997. Guys, thank you so much for doing this. Really, really cool to have you here. We'll pretend like we didn't talk backstage. How you guys doing?
I'm good.
Thank you. All is good, Jeff. Yes.
Right.
It's not 90 degrees today in Pittsburgh. I'm sure it's hot in Lancaster as well.
It is.
But
yeah.
We're inside and talking about metal, so no complaints.
I got the AC on finally, so it's kind of toasty, but Scott's used to that all the time.
Scott's like this is nothing, but I'll say this: when we had Scott up in Philly a couple months ago, and it was cold, it was very interesting to see the Florida boy deal with some windy weather here. But Scott managed pretty well here.
That was a really nice day, actually. That was a pretty nice day on.
I mean, it was 50 degrees, 55 degrees. But for Scott, that's polar weather,
freezing cold, right?
Yeah, he can't handle it.
Well, I guess we should talk really briefly, quickly about how we came to meet. You guys were at the Decibel Fest back in April, and you were signing books. And I felt stupid because I didn't feel stupid because I already had the book. And I'm just going to tell you straight up. I got a call from one Mr. Kelly Schaefer saying, "Did you get Burns' book yet?" And I'm like, "No." He's like, "Get the fuck on it. Like, you got to read that book, like, now." I'm like, I'm on it, brother. No problem. So I picked up my copy back then from Decibel. And then at the fest, my head was going 18 different ways, so I didn't think, get one as a gift. I should have, but we'll remedy that somewhere in the future, guys. But so we met there at the show, and I believe I walked up to Scott and said, "Hey, I kind of know somebody that you know." And I think I showed you a picture of Kelly and I or something like that, and that was kind of it. That was the end of it right there. Next thing you know, I'm behind the counter like an idiot. I'm walking back there like, "Oh, this is my place. I can just go back and talk to these guys," So we just kind of concocted to have you on then, and I'm stoked to have you here.
We're glad to be here, and Kelly's awesome. So thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Jeff.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. But I don't have mine autographed now, so I'm probably gonna have to send it to you and have you autograph it and then send it back for $42 or whatever it costs to ship anything anywhere these days. It's crazy.
Next year at Decibel, I'll be there just to hang out and drink beer. So
that would be awesome. Well, I just saw Kelly 3 weeks ago at Maryland Death Fest. We hung out. We actually went down. I went down the night before because he was doing the pre-fest on Wednesday, and I took him out to dinner, and we went out and had drinks. We were like, we're only gonna have one or two beers. It didn't quite work out that way. But I had to drive home, so I was a little responsible, but he didn't have to. So it was kind of funny, too, because I had a little gift for him. We can talk about that afterwards, but it might have something to do with this. So that was kind of fun to drop a gift on him there. But
how's his new lineup? How's it good? It's great.
Man, they're smoking killer, man. Now, I must say, I didn't get to see Atheist back in the day. Clearly, because it's kind of funny, man. I mean, Scott, we're close in age. You got me by a year or two, but I came up in that 80s stuff. So I was all hair metal, man. It was Crew and the heaviest I went was guys like this, right? I mean, which is
Sabbath.
Or if you see back here, one of my favorite all-time albums. All-time favorite album.
Guys are bad.
It's Crimson Glory's Transcendence.
Oh, come on, sure.
So yeah, so a lot of tie-ins to
Yeah, all them guys, yeah.
Well, of course, I've known about you for forever and ever and ever, but I struggled with the death metal thing, man. I struggled because I was coming from clean vocals and, you know, non-pummeling, not so much blast beats, but the blender nature of death metal.
It's all good.
Which was a great thing. So I guess what I want to do real quick before we get into all that stuff is I kind of wanted to talk about the fact that, and again, this is stealing a little bit from some of the other interviews, but the book is not, kind of doesn't start the way most books start about maybe a biography would start, where you start with, oh, he was born in such and such a year, and these were the family influences and all that stuff. And I think that works really well to the advantage of this book. It just kind of plows right ahead and gets into the meat and potatoes and the shit that all of us hardcore metalheads and weirdos and freaks, this is the stuff that we really want to know. But that said, what I kind of wanted to do was back up a little bit, Scott, and give you an opportunity to tell a little bit about yourself that maybe the book doesn't get into. And I know you're a very modest guy, so you're not going to get super flowery here, but can you tell me a little bit about, you know, some of your upbringing? I mean, you were born in Florida, right?
Well, my folks moved when I was like 3 or 4 from Florida. The long story is my grandpa got a divorce from my grandma. He was drunk and he liked to fish. God bless my grandpa. And so he moved to Florida on the beach, and he liked to drink and fish. He got a job at the fishing pier. He would take pictures. His job was to take the $1.50 admission on the pier to let you fish. And he was also the photographer. He had a Polaroid camera. So their advertising back then, I guess, was to just take a Polaroid of you like David with a schnook. And he would say it's like 7 pounds, and he would write on a magic marker that he caught it on like 6'7", like 1960, I don't know, 1970. And people would come up to the pier and say, oh, he caught the fish. Oh, there must be something there, so I'll pay my $1.50 to go fish. And that's how we moved to Florida. And like I said, he was a good guy, but he just, he liked to fish, and my mom moved down, and that's how I was there. But, yeah.
Were
But
you
let me
born
ask
in
you
Florida?
this.
Were you born in Florida or not?
No, I was born in Missouri.
Oh, you were born in Missouri. Okay.
So we moved from, like I said, is he got a divorce from my grandma and moved down there, and then we followed him down. So everyone thought we were crazy, cockroaches, mosquitoes. There was there was nothing cool about where we lived in Florida back in the day. All our relatives thought we were fucking nuts. But I mean, that's way before I knew anything about it. But I'm just saying, in general, is, you know, because back in the day, only Miami or something was cool. But I want to ask you a question, since you're a Sabotage Crimson Glory fan.
Oh yeah.
So you must be a Par Records fan and stuff. Dan Johnson, my buddy. Do you remember Damage, the Iron Maiden type band from Canada that he did?
I do remember that band. I don't own anything by, but here's an interesting segue. Like, I didn't really put together, Dan Johnson was really kind of critical to the early Morrisound thing in a lot of ways. I mean, and Kelly and I were talking about this the other day, and he's like, dude, you got to get Dan Johnson on. I'm like, all right, one legend at a time, man. I gotta, but, you know, so yes, I was aware of that band, but I didn't really put it together until more or less reading the book, David, was how some of these characters just kind of came together in the perfect storm of timing, and you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, Dan's a great guy, and I met Dan through Scott, of course. And Scott's right. Dan would probably tell you this too, is Dan is a classic producer, right? He's not the type of guy who's going to be running levels and doing the mics the way Scott was. Dan was there to work on the songs, and he was crucial in those early days. I mean, think about, as Scott said, he found Avatar, who became Sabotage, Crimson Glory. relative to this book, Dan, because Dan had Par Records, Dan had licensed, Sirens to Combat Records. Combat Records was the label of Death. Death says, okay, Dan Johnson does a good job with his stuff at Par Records here.
We're going there.
We're setting Chuck Schuldiner and his band to Morrisound. And for that first Morrisound session, who do you think they meet for the very first time? Scott Burns. So there's like a perfect example of
the
all
synchronicity, the synchronicity of things.
Yeah, it is really crazy how everything is connected in one way or the other. And Jeff and Scott, you're totally right. Dan's a great guy, great producer too, and definitely has a lot of good stories to tell.
We'll work on that legend soon. Go ahead, Scott.
No, Whiplash, Agent Steel. I mean, and David, this, the gentleman you did the Noise book, he was good friends with whatever the owner of, forgive me, for Noise Records.
Carl Ulrich Walterbach, yes.
Carl, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a 6 degrees, but anyway, I just brought it up because he mentioned Crimson Glory, which was a very good band, and Sabotage, Avatar, but The Dungeons Are Calling is a classic. But anyway, so digress, but we love you, Dan Johnson, and he definitely was a big part of my story in Morrisound. So thank you, Dan. And yes, for sure.
I don't know if you guys saw, but the big announcement today, it was big to me as a huge fan of this band. They signed to Brave Words Records,
yes. So the
Michael
Reform, yeah. So I got the same thing you got, Jeff. Is that Crimson Glory has Reform?
3/5.
Yeah, because obviously Midnight has passed away. So
I like the song. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, the song was good. I thought the song was good, and I think John and Ben, as long as they're steering the ship, I think Crimson Glory will be all right.
Well, it's Jeff, not John. John's not involved.
Oh, it's Jeff. John's not involved. That's right. Yeah. Thank you for correcting me.
It's Jeff and Dana and Ben. And Ben's a super nice guy. I talked to him recently a couple months ago, and he's pretty stoked about everything. So, well, Scott, back to you real quick, though. So you're living in Florida, and, I know you got into punk music as a youngster or, a teen, preteen, teen. What were you thinking? Like, what was your kind of thought process as a young teenager moving into, adulthood? Are you at all, because it seems to me reading the book that this, in a weird sort of way, you kind of fell into this. There was no predetermined plan to become this. I hate to use the word legendary because I know you're a modest guy and you're probably like, God, stop using that. But you do have this sort of this gravitas, right? And give me a little bit of that lead up to how things progress from your teenage years into how you land at Morrisound and start to develop this career.
Yeah, no, listen, when I was a kid, I listened to hard rock. I mean, I guess Black Sabbath was about the only metal thing that existed. But I mean, Rainbow, Thin Lizzy, UFO, Rush. I mean, so I'm 61. So I mean, listen to all that stuff, classic AOR, all that. And I mean, even Kiss, who there's bands that I don't, but anyway, all that stuff. I mean, go on. I mean, anyway, anything that was rock and roll or on the heavier side, I liked. But at the same time I remember seeing, like, when the Sex Pistols came on, I think it was like 2020 with Two Downs and the lady that died or whatever. My parents were like, oh, this is crap. And I thought I was like, fuck this. This is cool. I liked anything. To me, as it got over the top of classic rock, Zeppelin and all that, I still loved all that. But at the same time, I thought it was too much, whatever. For whatever reason, I thought it was too much like commercial or blah, blah, blah. So I like punk rock and stuff like that. And then, so I got the story goes is in 83 or something, my friends had a band. They did punk rock, new wave, old wave, whatever you want to call stuff like that. I did something for them. I told them, hey, like, they'd won a contest, won a recording studio. It fucking sucked in Tampa. There was nothing going on in Tampa. But I thought, hey, this is really cool. I went in there with them, sat around with the guy, said, this is cool. I was like, I didn't like the fact of live sound. You never knew what it sounded like. Every other venue was shitty. We had shitty PAs, everything like that. Everything was just like up in the air. So I liked the studio experience. So I went around all the studio. I said, hey, you guys, they wanted to do like a 7-inch or something, or a 2-song single, whatever, back in the day.
Right.
I said, hey, I said, let's, so anyway, I went around to all the studios and I found Jim and Tom and Rick Miller, and I found Morrisound Recording, and they were the only fucking real studio in Tampa Bay area. Sorry, all everybody else, you guys all sucked. But anyway, it was the only real studio. And anyway, so I went in there and I told the band and I told Jim and Tom, nothing. I said, look, I'm going to pay half the time. These guys, you guys don't let me fuck it up too bad, and we get a decent decent record. I have fun. I learn. You guys get something decent. So I did that for Rat Cafeteria, a couple bands, local bands or whatever, because I liked it. It was a more controlled environment. Jim, Tom, Rick were super fucking cool. The rest is history. I got a job as an assistant. And I just like the fact is that I enjoyed the studio and that they were fucking way ahead of the game. And I think that's why, back to Dan Johnson and Sabotage, Avatar, Nasty Savage, Executioner, Atheist, Ravage, all the old bands, the rock bands, they all went to fucking Morrisound. It's not because of Scott Burns. It's because Jim and Tom, and it was a good studio, and we could go on for that a long time. So that was the start. I think, as far as if you want to talk about me, the thing for me was perhaps is that I was very open to extreme music. So like I said, is when the Executioner guys were coming in to record and stuff like that, and I met them, the Nasty Savage guys, they were like, hey, we need a sound man, or we need somebody to do sound. And I was like, okay, I'll fucking help you out. I know how to do live sound, right? I mean, none of us were killer, but at the same time, I could do it. And I would go and I would help them out, and I liked them. I liked their spirit. I liked their energy. They were fucking young kids, 15, 16 years old. They fucking barely could drive. And I thought, hey, this is cool. I remember telling Tim Hubbard, who did the photos for Slowly We Ride, I said, this guy makes Waddy from The Exploited sound like a sissy. No offense, Waddy, you're the best ever. But I meant, it was like, he was fucking, they were just over the top, and I liked that. And that was it. And you're right, Jeff, I didn't understand it, and I wasn't, but I was just cool with anything that was extreme. And that was it. Yeah,
I mean, in reading the book, I think there's a number of takeaways, but one of the big takeaways I got was that, a lot of us, myself included, we go to college, we learn a skill, allegedly, at college, although I'm not doing anything like what I went to college for, obviously, but we're allegedly programmed to sort of do this. In my case, it was accounting. I ended up as an HR guy most of my life, which is interesting. But one of the things I take away from this book is that you kind of pretty much were just very adaptable to learning on the job, so to speak, and just kind of figuring it out, which tells me that in a lot of respects, you're a very sharp guy, because I've been around bands all my life and I still don't know how to fucking count when I drum. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a guitar player. That's all I know how to do. It's like effect shit fucking blows my mind 30 years later. I'm like, how the fuck do I learn how to program this quad cortex? It's way beyond me. But you seem to have this innate ability to kind of be adaptable and sort of just figure it out. And it's kind of ballsy that you walked into Morrisounds and just were like, hey, I want to do this thing and I want to come work here. I mean, that's what I took from it. Is that a fair assessment? David, I want to get your thoughts on it before I hear Scott.
Well, that's completely fair. And the story that blew me away that Scott shared was how he said, "All right, listen, we could split the costs here for recording here."
Explain that to me, because I read that and I'm like, I read it 4 times. I'm like, I don't know if I understand this completely. Like, Scott, you were putting your own money in?
Sure, because I mean, who the fuck was I? I was just some hack, right? I mean, I wanted to do it, and I mean, they didn't know. I mean, why would they trust me? So I was like, here, I'll put up my own money. I mean, I was committed to the whole thing. Was I wanted to learn how to do it. You know what I mean? That's the whole thing. Is listen, I think you're overthinking things. I'm no genius. I'm nothing. Jim and Tom and Rick, I learned everything for them. I sat there for fucking years. Years. I mean, remember, I started in 83.
Right.
I didn't do anything till probably like 88, 87, 89. But I mean, I would sit there every night and be the assistant, the studio ass. You know what I mean? Get burgers, do everything, hook everything up
for us.
because I just loved music and I liked the experience of it. So, like I said, I was very. I'll say this is. I would rather be this dumbest guy in a smart room than the smartest guy in a dumb room.
That's a great way. Yeah.
Because I will always learn something, right? I can hear myself talk. You know what I mean? It's like Dan Rock from Psychotic Waltz said, you've been in the bathroom too long smelling your own shit. You don't think it smells, you think it smells good.
Good, yeah. Yeah.
Get them. But I'm just saying is, I was lucky to hang out with smart guys, right? And that's why, going back once again to Dan and Jim and Tom, listen, the Sabotage records, Nasty Savage, all that stuff. Those guys were doing records that sounded good back then, especially for metal. And like, David, like you said, with Carl and stuff like that, that's why they trusted them, is they were ahead of the time with technology, with triggering drums, with, I mean, besides like Metallica, I mean, I just, not to compare because they're the biggest, but, with layering guitars and stuff like that, there weren't a lot of studios that were adept in recording really heavy metal stuff. I mean, sure, Scorpion, I mean, listen, there were big bands, don't get me wrong. But as far as on the underground or smaller scene it wasn't so much.
Yeah, very different though. Very different recording Rat or Dokken.
Sure.
All bands I love. Don't get me wrong. I still love those bands.
That was a great song.
What's that?
Round and Round by Rat.
Bo Hill. Fantastic. Right. But very different recording those bands and recording death metal. And I think another key takeaway and I was like, damn, I never thought of it that way. But you describe early death metal, early extreme metal as trying to control sound that was created almost in a blender. And that really is what you listen to some of these old demos, which a lot of guys, the hardcore true cult guys are like, oh man, it all sucks after the demos. And I often go, nah, dude, like I get the demos, but they all sound like shit. Like I want to hear something that sounds good, that makes my ears go back and want to hear that again. Case in point, this is one of the greatest production albums I've ever heard in my life. It's stunning. And I never knew those were triggered drums. I thought they were all, in fact, they weren't even live drums, right? I believe they weren't live.
No, they were all live. They were just triggered. I mean, that Transcendence you're talking, both the Crimson Glory ones attended. Yeah, everybody played live. Nobody we weren't quite, nobody. The thought of playing pads back then really didn't exist in our world for metal. I mean, in other words, triggering did. And that was the thing, is that Tom and Jim, with using noise gates and like a TC-2290, which had a fast trigger, that was the big deal, was that you could get away with that stuff. But to go back to that, is those toms are real. Maybe the kicks and snares are triggered, but that's how good Jim and Tom were.
Same as Sabotage.
It's a great Sony record.
Yeah, same with Sabotage, like Hall of the Mountain King. Just such an epic production on that album. It's like, wow, you hear that stuff and you're kind of blown away. But so I guess we should talk real quick, David, to get you involved in here. So the way I understand it is your good friend Tim took a lot of photos, band photos, studio photos, album cover photos or rear covers, inners, and all that stuff. You guys are talking one day and he's like, man, we should, you should do something with this. You need to, because I don't sense, Scott, that you're a guy that would be like, oh, I want to write a book about my experiences. Just doesn't seem like you're that guy. And so you end up connecting with David through the obituary book and your remembrances of that. And I guess at some point you decide, hey, you're talking to Tim, and you guys decide to ask him to become involved. Was there any trepidation in that? Was there any like, is anybody going to even be interested in this kind of thing? Or who cares? It was 30 years ago, that kind of stuff. And on your part, Scott.
No, I think, like I said, as Tim had just talked about, doing like a photo book. And I think we quickly realized that it was out of our league. And David was so cool. I talked to him quite, like you said, as we become good friends. I mean, maybe we didn't even realize how good of friends we would become, but talked so much about obituary and had such an easy rapport with each other that I said, hey, would you be interested in this? Because really the idea and at the time, it really wasn't to be about me. It was just about the bands and the scene at the time and to capture a spirit of the bands. And since Tim had the photos, and I know it ends up saying the Scott Burns sessions or whatever, but really that was the whole thing and I just felt super comfortable with David that when I asked, like, hey, I think this guy, he's super pro, he's super cool, that it would be good to see what he has to say. I mean, I had no idea if he'd say yes or no. I remember when he told whatever. But like I said, I just said, let's try it because I knew it was much more work than me or Tim could probably do.
Yeah.
But David, go ahead, buddy.
Which we're going to ask about.
That sounds pretty accurate. Yeah, Scott and I spoke probably 4 or 5 times during the obituary book, and we got, as Scott said, we got along great right away. And I've said this in a few other interviews. We are aligned in a lot of ways, socially, politically, whatever you want to put it, and that made it really easy to get to know Scott. And I think we had connected after the obituary book had wrapped, and that's when he said, hey, Tim and I have been thrown around the idea of doing a book. Would you be interested in putting together with us? And of course, I said yes. And then I think an hour later, I shared the information with Albert from Decibel, and then he just, it was like a one-word email, yes, with all caps, like, or yes, I'm super interested in doing this. Like, there was no head. So that put that aspect in place. But to Scott's point, the first few months of the book, we were really operating under the idea that this was primarily going to be a photo book with some stories from the bands.
Little blurbs.
Blurbs with Tim's photos. But a few things happened along the way. Number one, all the bands wanted to do is talk about Scott. They didn't want to talk about themselves. They wanted to talk about Scott and how great Scott was. So more stories kept on piling up, more and more stories. And then we realized we had more stories than we had photos. And so Albert jumped in and said, hey, listen, we're going to have to change direction here. And this is how we should do the book. So we eventually landed on the format of it being an oral history. So Scott would share his side and the bands. And it seemed like a really nice way for everyone to share their recollections. And I think the number we got up to like 69 bands, but there's definitely way more than Scott did. There's easily more, but some bands were hard to find, and some guys just couldn't remember anything, and it seriously just snowballed. Like we had no designs of the book turning out the way that it did when we started, but I'm very happy with the way it turned out. And
I bet.
it wasn't a hard book to put together. Actually, what made it easy is everyone wanted to talk about the people who I did connect with, which were a lot. I mean, everyone had nice things to say about Scott. There are a few exceptions, of course, but everyone wanted to talk about Scott.
You had a lot of source material to draw from. You didn't have to work to You didn't have to.
No,
No,
oh no,
that's the wrong
no.
word. Hang on.
There was nothing. Yeah.
I want to retract that word work, because you had a lot of work to do. But what I was going to say was you didn't have to work to formulate a narrative, so to speak. In other words, yeah.
No, the narrative came really quick and early that Scott Burns was an easy guy to work with. And he was relaxed and easygoing, and he went the extra mile for us. And that's the theme. That's one of the themes of the book. And then on the flip side is, as we go along, Scott gets burnt out. He's not making a lot of money from doing death metal. He's pigeonholed as a producer. So you have those two narratives that go along, and it naturally evolved. Actually, it came together really well. Yes, it is a big book, and it was a lot of work to put together. You couldn't have written it any other way, actually, in terms of how the bands talked about Scott and Scott's own life. So they sort of converged at the perfect spot.
Go ahead, Scott. Any thoughts on that?
No, I just wanted to say thanks to David and to Albert, because, to be honest with you, I mean, like I said, is when I ask just about including all the bands, like some demo bands. I don't think I really fucking realized how many bands, and I don't mean to say this, but I did do quite a few bands, and I did not realize them. And David would call me and said, I found this band. And to be honest, there are bands that I'd forgotten I had recorded, and I'm sorry. But at the same time I didn't want anybody to come down the road and say, hey, why didn't you? Because at the time listen, it was open door policy. If you could book the time with Roger Stephen at the studio, whether you had a label or not, if you wanted to come with me, it was cool. So I felt like all the bands deserved to be in there, whatever that, I recorded. And, to David's point I will say this, and Albert's point in the beginning, I was like, well, I thought this would be a photo essay book. But you know what? I love the book, and I think it's great. And I learned something, and I'd like to say this. As a producer, bands like, for instance, we talked about harmony corruption, and like Mick saying, oh, I didn't like it because it would sound like Entombed, and at the end, you get the book and you say, well, I thought it'd be more of a photo essay book, but I love the book. And it shot me full circle to learn about being a producer and being a band, right? Because the band, sometimes I sat there and I said, well, this is the way it is. But I love the book. So I'd like to say thank you.
We had a great time putting together the book, and it's still nice to hear from people a lot about it. So, I mean, Jeff, you were there. When Scott and I were there doing the signing session, it was almost the same thing as the book. We had no idea what to expect. And
lines of people.
As you saw, so it was, I think that's just a testament to all the work Scott did. And, another thread of the book, too, is definitely due credit to the Morrisound people. But leading up to that, death metal was not a sound easily captured, and Scott was one of the guys leading the way in terms of getting death metal to sound good and professional and professionals. Like you said, that goes back. Let's go back to the demo thing. Oh, the demos always sound great. It's their best work, but I don't know. If you put on some of the stuff that Scott was doing at Morrisound, it always sounded professional, and you can make out all the instruments. That would make you want to go back to it, and that's why a lot of those albums are legendary. So you could definitely see a lot there.
Yeah, I think, another takeaway is just not only the reverence that most of these bands, I think there's two instances of people that don't talk glowingly about Scott. That's pretty good when you've had 64 to 94 bands come through. You only have two dudes that kind of talk shit about you. That's kind of surprising, but and of course it would have been a very different book maybe if everybody had gotten back and said, that guy was a total dick, man, I hated that fucking guy. Would have been a much shorter book, I believe, right? So
it would have been a much shorter book, but the stories just kept. And one of the coolest things about the book is, like Scott said, through Metal Archives or Google or Discogs, we would find these bands like the Canadian band Overthrow, for instance. Scott had not listened to them for 30 years, probably. Scott, I sent you the the link and the demo and everything, and that's all Scott and I talked about for like a couple of weeks. He could not believe. He's like, I completely forgot about this record when after I recorded, and now listening to it completely brings me back, and I forgot about how great these guys.
They're amazing.
That was also they're amazing band. They're a band that should have made it but didn't, and you have a band like Devastation, right? That band from Corpus Christi, a tremendous band.
Oh
right?
yeah,
Killer band. And I sent that over to Scott. He's like, oh, I completely remember doing everything with those guys in the studio. And then you listen and you figure out, you wonder why these guys didn't do more than what they did. But that was a lot of fun.
They did, yeah.
Yeah, so that was one of the fun things about the book was
what was really fun trying to prep for this for me was, of course, I know the big names. Okay, I know all the big names because I've been around. There were many bands in here that I'm like, who the fuck is Tempest Fusion? I've never heard of them. Yeah. So I go pull them up, and of course, everything's on the Oracle now. You can just go find it out there on wherever. And I'm like, whoa, this is some fucking bizarre shit, but it's pretty cool. And so I found with this, here's the thing. When I was prepping for this, I'm like, well, I'll just go down through a bunch of the key bands. And then I'm like, well, there's no fucking way I could do that. We'll be here till midnight. There's just no way. There's too much. In a way, that's the one caveat that I'm sorry, my thing is binging here. The one thing I can say about this book is that it's almost too much to an extent, because you want to go back and reference other things that you just read, and you're like, oh wait, hold on. So he was doing that here, and then he did this here, and you're like, and then again, like I said, I was digging into some of these bands that I didn't really know about at all before and hadn't ever heard of. Because look, man, sure, I'm a lover of metal and a lover of death metal and everything, but I sure as hell, I'm not a historian. You know what I mean? Like you are, David. I'm not as well versed in some of this stuff. So it was really kind of cool to have that kind of be an ancillary effect of reading the book, was to go, oh, fuck, now I got to go hunt this down and see if I can buy a physical copy of it. So this is going to cost me some money, I'm afraid. Yeah. Just say it.
Yeah, it was fun because I had a general idea of all the bands Scott did. Not all the bands, I should say, like the big bands. We all know the big bands that Scott did, but then once you break it down and get into those bands that did one-offs or their demo level era bands, and you dig into them, you're like, okay, it's actually pretty cool. So it's remarkable.
Yeah. But there were a lot of one-off bands, and David, I genuinely appreciate you adding them and making sure that we cover them. Because like I said, I guess the only thing is for me is at the time is it was a scene and there were a lot of bands and some did better than others, but they all came and spent their money and we hung out and we had a good time. And so, I mean, I would feel remiss if they didn't get included. But like I said, even if it's just a historical note, because they all came and tried, and it was up to people like Monty, Slagle, Digby, whoever, Givens, to decide, who gets signed.
Yeah, but the thumbs up or the thumbs down, right? Yeah.
Record, Jeff. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the other bands that I've known the name, but I never checked them out, was Hell Witch. Holy fuck, that shit's bonkers. It's just bonkers, man. And I'm like, what the hell is this? Like, nobody was doing music. Are they really?
Yeah, Pat's still around, right? He was a fixture. I mean, Scott had known him before, but yeah, you're right, Jeff. Hell Witch is, you can think of like Hell Witch, Atrocity, the Pestilence record Scott did. I mean, that's out there. That stuff is
very
wild
experimental stuff, right? Very experimental and stuff like that. David, speak real quick to, I mean, when I said this, I said, oh, it wasn't that much work. It was a lot of work. And talk to me about how the hell you man. I was saying to Scott before you jumped in, doing these interviews, I'm hunting people down and trying to get commitments and all that kind of stuff. You know exactly where I'm going with this. Like, how in the hell did you put all this together and just micromanage it and stay on top of all?
There's always a certain level. Albert and I talk about this a lot. There's a certain level of project management when it comes into a book. And I will not profess to be an expert of it, but the one thing that we had nailed down pretty early on that I figured out at least was, if you look at the meat of Scott's career, like 1990, 91, 92, they're all sort of clunked together there. The only way to sequence this book was to do it by year. And
Right.
so I charted out all the bands that Scott had did in those years and just did my best to track down the interviews. I looked up there. I tried to keep the release dates at least somewhat accurate. I'm sure some are a little bit out of order, but it's almost impossible sometimes to know
Sure.
when something really was released. And thankfully, you know, I have accumulated enough contacts over the years to reach out and get the interviews myself. But through Facebook, Instagram, whatever internet search you could think of, trying to find people, I was able to track a good chunk of them down. But yeah, it was a lot of work, a lot of organization, and I did my best to keep everything straight.
I mean, you talk about devastation. That's one that we have in common here, in that my buddy and I, Dennis, every month we do a Forgotten Metal Gems episode where we talk about some thrash bands or some death metal bands, and then some hair type stuff. Like we talk about Ben's project post Crimson Glory called Parish. I don't know if you guys remember the band Parish. He did one album. Love that album, man. But I was trying to hunt down some of the guys from Devastation, and I just couldn't find them. Yeah. So it's nice for you. You've got maybe some deeper contacts to get a hold of. Like Kelly's helped me a lot, get a hold of a lot of people, which is super, super cool. But at the same point in time, you don't want to wear that welcome out. It's like, hey, dude, can you get me the contact for? Hey, can you, that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? How'd you micromanage that?
It's a lot of trial and error. You almost have to go into it knowing that people won't respond. You can't always be presumptuous and expect a response. But going back to what we said earlier, if you put the name Scott Burns in your email headline, I guess that increased the chances of people getting back to me. And so that generally helps. Maybe I should just use that in every walk of life. Just put Scott Burns in my email headers, no matter what it is, and see who responds. But no, it's always it's no different than any other. I'm going through it right now with the book I'm currently working on. It's always a process in getting people to reach out, and you can't expect everyone to get back to you right away. And books are like movies in a way. Like you can't, movies are never shot. They take time, and they're never shot sequentially, right? They're always pieced together. And you have to approach a book that way, because if you think like, okay, if I have to talk to this person and before I get to the next, it's going to take forever to do.
You'll be waiting forever.
Yeah, and thankfully with Scott's, is like we said, we already had the narrative figured out pretty much, so that helped me. There were some bands who Scott did in 1996 that I did really early on, and then conversely, there were bands that Scott did in 1990 that came really late. And
okay.
You just had to plug them in, and that's just how it goes.
Now, Scott, when David is accumulating these testimonials, if you will, that's kind of what it is. Like these testimonials from various members of bands or however it is. When David, did you present Scott with the things that were said in these? Okay.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
Scott reviewed the whole book. That's sort of a practice that I have, and
what I meant was before, like as you were getting feedback from people, or did you wait until the end, or?
No, there were some things I definitely shared with Scott in advance that I wanted him to be aware of and for him to chime in on. And for the most part, Scott went first. I would ask him about a band, then he would go, then I would talk to the band, but sometimes it was flipped.
Okay.
Sometimes I get the band first and Scott. And to Scott's credit, he has a really good memory, but there definitely were some things that, and Scott can attest to this, is, we had to jog his brain on some things, and the response the response we got from the bands helped fill Scott's response out, because like, okay, now I remember that. Because let's face it, like it's very hard to remember things 30 years ago. What were you doing in 1994? It's pretty darn hard to figure out, and no different than doing this here. But Scott has a good memory, and we were able to get everything put together that way. But yeah, along the way, I definitely did share a lot of things with Scott as we were putting the book together.
So Scott, was it kind of overwhelming emotionally sometimes to read some of the glowing kind of praise, or did you kind of, again, you're a modest guy, so I don't think you were expecting everybody to go, oh, Scott's the greatest thing ever. But I mean, was it intense? Was it a rush to go back there and kind of revisit these memories and the things that guys would bring up maybe about you and talk so glowingly about you? Or was it pretty intense?
Oh, I mean, yes, it's overwhelming, but at the same time, it was very nice, very kind. But I'll say this: most of my memories are great as well. You know, obviously, listen, we're all human beings. We're all full of fucking shit if we sit there and say that everybody we met we loved and is the greatest person
Oh yeah,
ever.
sure.
But at the same time, is most of the memories were good. And when I will say this, when David presented everything to me, is I tried never to ever say that is full of shit. If someone said they think whatever, then that was their opinion, and I would abide by that because that's their story.
Right.
Because once again, is the whole thing was it's not really my story. It was just a story about me and the bands and the whole scene, right? So, like I said, is sometimes, but I think most of the stuff it was okay, whether what they had to say was good or bad or not, right? And to go back, like I, just because we spent some time together with like Napalm and Mick Harris, right? I still think the world of Mick. He's fucking the godfather of grindcore. And not to bring this up, I hope he doesn't mind, Mick, because I haven't seen you. You're a great guy. Like when he said he didn't like the album and he thought it would be like Entombed. I'm not, it's okay with me, right? I mean, I have no hard feelings. That's everyone's personal take. And like I said, I learned something about that sometimes is you say, hey, this isn't what you thought, but you learn to love it and you like it, and that's okay, right? So, like I said, it's just the whole thing was for me is like I learned went to Albert's Festival in Philly was all the people who came up and said, I love this album or I love that. It really has, to be honest with you, it fucking has nothing to do with me. They love the songs, they love the band, and I just happen to record them.
Yeah.
So that's a great thing.
It's the connectivity, right? It's the connectivity. These are milestone albums to many of us that are this age, and the younger generations that are coming along, which is super cool to, I was able to impart some of that to my son. He started getting into death metal because his freaky old man was into death metal, that kind of stuff. So it's a cool thing. I had a thought that I wanted to ask you, and I completely lost it. So we'll move on from that. Maybe I'll come back to it. That's what happens, David. You get the olds.
I totally get it.
David knows that from sitting with me for a year. But
yeah, you're fine, Scott.
Well, so
real quick, it was nice to meet. Like I met a gentleman, Derek from Tomb Mold, up there.
Beautiful guy, one of my good friends.
Super nice guy, atheist, cynic, stuff like that influence. But it was nice to meet a younger generation of people that are into the bands and stuff like that. I met a couple doctors that say like, hey, listen, I listen to, they're closer to my age that listen to death. They grew up on death metal. I never would have thought that, right? I mean, not in a bad way, but you just don't think of these things. So it was a great, wonderful time there. And like I said, I'm just happy that I could be a part of it. And like I said, I love all those guys. It was a good scene. And, it's like life is. Sometimes you're pissed at your uncle. Sometimes you're not. But, that's just life. We loved each other and got along, right?
Well, that was another funny takeaway was that a lot of the guys in the bands called you like our dad. It was either a father figure or you were that Uncle Scott, or you never got, oh man, it was just like, you just never got the impression, with the exception of one or two cases, which you have to read the book to kind of get into, but that anybody really didn't enjoy your company. Now, you mentioned the fact that, we said that, you were always kind of this calming influence and stuff like that, and you said you would go out and scream fuck, right?
Look at the double.
I laughed out loud. I literally laughed out loud at fucking DiGiorgio calling you from around the corner during the individual thought patterns thing and saying they were going to be late. And you're like, what the fuck, man? You're like tripping out. And then he walks around. I guess they drove up like 5 minutes later and they came in the door and you're like, you fucker. You know, I mean, that's just, and that seems like something Steve would do. I mean, I don't know Steve personally, but I kind of know him a little bit. And it's like,
he still busts Scott's balls all the time. Trust me. So
does he?
Don't you worry. Yes. He still rags on Scott.
You know, and that's another funny thing, Scott, you brought up you got doctor friends that, you know, listen to this metal. And it's like, the one thing I've learned through doing this for a couple of years is, and I've kind of had some interaction with bands. So you and I actually have some kind of mutual friends, by the way, Scott, which I didn't really put together until I started reading this book. But Mark Prater, I've met Mark a couple different times because John Wesley, you know John Wesley, Wes?
Sure. Auto Drive is a guitarist. Yeah.
So Wes is a good buddy of mine because I was pretty involved in the Porcupine Tree many years ago. Nice. And Wes was the guy there. So in fact, I've had Wes on not too long ago, and just a really, what's amazing to me is just how salt of the earth and good most of these guys are. You think of the things like, I don't know, like John Tardy, you know, that voice kind of evokes to an outsider that's hearing that voice. You're like, that guy probably, you know, mutilates cats and does all kind of bizarro things, and there's nothing could be further from the truth. You know, I mean, these are really salt of the earth people that are really good people, and I've found that with death metal. And David, I'm sure you very well aware of this, that you're kind of blown away by it sometimes, right? You know, you're like,
they're almost all really nice guys. There are definitely some guys who are a little more rough around the edges than others. You know, John Tardy's one of the nicest guys. All the Cannibal guys are some of the nicest dudes. Kelly, you can't say enough good things about Kelly Schaefer from Atheist. Cynic guys, you know, Paul, Jason, you know, Reiner's not around, unfortunately, but yeah, they're all really Steve DiGiorgio is one of the nicest guys you'd ever want to meet in your life. Same with Gene. So yeah, it's remarkable, and it's, you know, that saying is like, don't ever meet your heroes, but it's always great that you talk to these guys and you realize, they're not much different than you and I, and it makes it easy to do.
And you know, it's great you said that. That's a great analogy. Like you said, never meet your heroes, and I can't think of one instance where recently I did have one at MDF. Never mind. I'm sure you can go there, but I can't think of many instances where I've just asked for a few seconds of time or a minute or two of time where these guys that I kind of revere as heroes, not in a weird way, but in a, you know, not in a mythical fashion, but in just like, hey man, I look up to you as a fellow musician. You've inspired me, blah, blah, blah. I've rarely run into any of these guys that were total dicks that were like, you know, really, dude, you know, that kind of thing. So, and that's what I really got out of this book, was just a lot of very appreciative people in here. You know what I mean? Appreciative for the relationships that they had, whether it be working or whether that developed into real deep friendships, like Scott, your friendship with Chuck or Paul or any of the, you know, the obituary guys. You know, that's a real difficult thing to quantify and put into words unless it's coming directly from someone's lips. So, that was another takeaway from the book. It was really good.
I think all those, I mean, to your point there, Jeff, is that, you know, you talked about Wes and Mark Prater. I mean, listen, their band Auto Drive was like a bedrock band of Morrisound. They were in the studio all the time. Jim and Tom working with them, trying to get a deal. Incredible musicians. And I mean, it just never worked out for them, but they were great, more on their progressive rock, metal side, whatever. But the back to your point was, with all the bands, was I cannot emphasize this enough. Obituary, Atheist, Cynic, all the bands, DSI, Chuck. I mean, listen, forget about them all. I mean, name them all. They all fucking worked their fucking ass off. They were all incredibly disciplined and inspired. whether they like to drink beer, smoke pot, they had long hair, people thought that whatever. They were incredibly disciplined and spent time, money, hard-earned. They were there for one reason, to work hard and try and be a big band, or not a big, I mean, not big is a bad word, but I'm saying is they were focused on doing something positive. They just weren't like, just, hey, like, go and record. So I can't say that enough. And especially back in the day when those bands weren't revered, they were thought of not so well, right?
Weirdos, outcasts, scary people, you know.
Right.
The whole panic thing.
They were outside. They were on the fringe of metal, and David and I spoke a long time about it. And the nice thing David said now is that it's just considered metal now. Back in the day, it wasn't really kind of cool to. I mean, listen. There were certain people that thought it was cool, obviously, like Monty, Borovoy, Digby, you know, Slagle, whatever, that signed some bands, Century Media, Marcus, but in general, it wasn't so cool. But these guys worked hard. I mean, I cannot say that enough. They're listen. I quit recording them a long time ago. And most of these guys fucking still do well without me. So it has something to say about them than me. They were all talented guys that maybe they needed a little, like Jim, Tom, and I gave them a little poke in the right direction as far as recording. Now they all know the fucking drill. They're all like Tiger Woods. They're all these fucking phenoms. They know how to record. They don't need anybody. So they make great songs and great records. But back in the day, they were, for young guys, I don't think people realize how serious they were.
Yeah. I think too, that brings up an interesting point, though. I mean, I don't think a lot of those guys, maybe some of the guys that you work with for a lot of years, could walk into an old style studio. You know, digital recording has changed the dynamic of everything. Now I can, use my $3,000 laptop and record practically radio ready stuff or album ready stuff. You couldn't do that back then, man. You had to rely on people that knew what they were doing. Now, the interesting thing is, though, that in reading the book, you didn't really know what you were doing initially. You kind of had to learn on the fly for quite a long while. And you were also tutored by some pretty stellar individuals. I mean, I talked about how intelligent you must be, but man, I've read and saw some interviews with Tom and Jim. Wow, those dudes, holy fuck. Like, they are genius level guys. You know what I mean? To me, anyways. I mean, and I wanted to ask you about that, like getting into that state-of-the-art studio that they put together there. Like, you mentioned the 8-channel mixer that was developed at Morrisounds. Talk a little bit about that, because I'm not sure I know what that is. Like, can you explain that in layman's terms that somebody watching would understand, and how that changed things?
No, I mean, back in the day, off the board, you would just get like a stereo mix. You would ask it was just like a headphone mix that would be 2 channels. So you'd have to ask the engineer. You'd say, like, if you're the drummer, I can't hear my fucking kick drum. So the guy would turn up the kick drum. Then the fucking keyboard player's saying, the fucking kick drum's way too loud, turn it down.
Yeah.
I can't hear the guitar, whatever. So he would be providing you the mix, right? Whatever you hear, just like a spare speakers. So Jim, Tom, and listen, he passed away, but let's not ever forget about Rick Miller, because he was the 3rd owner, and he was super important, and he was an electrical engineer, and he designed it. But they came up with their own 8-channel mixer, and basically it's shit now, but back in the day it wasn't shit. It was a mixer that gave you 8 inputs. So from the console, I could give you kick, snare, and I could give you, let's say, a mix of toms, right? Or I could spread that, Or I could give you all 6 toms, but I could give you 8 channels. So you could say whatever 8 things you want, you have. And each person could mix them as they want. So typically, like drums with toms and cymbals and stuff, you just mix them into a pair for stereo to hear it. But, and then you'd have bass, guitar, vocals, whatever. But 8 channels is plenty for them to hear. Nowadays, people would probably laugh and say, fuck 8 channels, I need like whatever. But I'm just saying is back in the day, it was a big deal because you could hear everything that you wanted to hear. And no one else on the planet had that. And they built that on their own. And like I said, so that's why there were certain things there that they did that were nice, right? So, but anyway, so that really helped. And like I said, I was a benefit of that. And like Cakewalk using MIDI programming with Brian Benscoter, Super Brian.
Yeah, when did that kind of come into vogue? Was that the mid 80s, right around 90, late 80s, early 90s?
Well, I think in the 90s, I mean, you can look up when Cakewalk, it's a program.
I remember
it. Yes, but the thing for us is, especially with the bands that blasted, that played super fast, is to straighten that stuff out. The slow stuff was easier to straighten out. But when you could trigger it with MIDI and then have it, now everybody uses it with Pro Tools and things like that, and stuff that would take me a week to do, people do in a couple of hours. But I'm just saying especially blasting and stuff like that, you would have to go in there, you could fix stuff like that with the kicks and snares. And like I said, Brian, Jim, for them, when they came up with all that, there wasn't many people doing it at all. And I'm not trying to say the Morrisound was revolutionary, but at the same time as far as in the metal world and stuff, and playing that fast, the point about in a blender it's very hard when everything's super fast and loud and stuff like that. So that was the benefit. Nowadays, nowadays, anybody, like you said, Jeff, you can do it. Everybody can do it. That's why there's no benefit. I'm an old fart now. Anybody can do it, and anybody can make great. Not anybody, but I'm saying now everybody's records sound really, really good because of the technology. But it was difficult back in the day, and anyway, so.
Well, that goes back to the blender analogy, where a lot of these bands just sounded sort of muddy and kind of like, everything was congested. There was no clarity to a lot of the stuff. And I think Morrisound was one of the first, certainly with this.
When the acoustic guitars are playing, it sounds good.
Well, there you go. Of course, just the acoustics, right? Well, actually, that's a good segue into, I guess your first kind of major thing was with Agent Steel, right? And was that kind of a handoff, or was that your own thing? I'm trying to remember now.
No, and David can talk more to this. I was more of an assistant and stuff like that, and that was a Dan Johnson record with Jim. And my biggest job was to run FLAC for John Cyrus, but Juan, the guitarist, and all. So I did work on it, but as far as engineering, no. But go ahead, David.
Yeah, no, it definitely started for metal, and that's where we started in the book, was with Agent Steel. But
right.
Scott's his big breaks started, Atheist, The Beyond demo, Beneath the Remains, Slowly Rerot, Piece of Time. Those are sort of the main four in there. Leprosy, then Spiritual Healing. Those are all Scott's big breaks, if you want to put them that. Probably the biggest one that everyone pieces. Yeah, probably the one that everyone points to is always Beneath the Remains. I think the circumstances in which Scott recorded and how great that album turned out, that made people quickly realize what a great job Scott could do.
Yeah, you went down there over Christmas, right? How'd your wife take that? Was she not exactly thrilled with that idea?
No, she was okay.
Were you married yet at that point, or were you live?
Yeah, roughly. I think so. 8, 9, 90. So almost, or we've been together a long time. So So we've been together before that, but either got married right after or right before. But it was okay. I mean, I was working a lot, so she understood. But
yeah, that's another thing. You put like crazy hours in on some of these projects, or probably all of the albums that you worked on. What your career kind of is talked about. You started there when in '83, was it?
Well, as an assistant, like in
Right.
'83. Yes. So, yeah.
But then you kind of dipped out around the end of the '90s there. Were you feeling? We'll get to a couple of the albums quick then, and then I'll get you out of here. But were you kind of feeling pretty burnt out by the time that you got to the end of the run, so to speak? And did pure digital recording start to affect your decision to stay in the game at all?
Well, kind of burnout would be an understatement. Digital recording, nothing really to do with it. Like I said, we did the Cynic album Focus. At the time, there were the poor man's version. There were ADAT machines. Like I recorded some stuff on ADATs, but nobody really professionally was doing ADATs. Like you did demos and stuff, but we rented a Mitsubishi X850, a digital half-inch tape machine for Focus to try and use that. But no, I don't think the digital thing is. But just at the end, Jeff, the bands there was fewer bands around. They were recording farther and farther apart, and I had a lot of fun, but at the same time I don't know, it just seemed like a good time to leave. And yes, I was probably burnt out. Absolutely.
Let's talk about a couple of the bands and some of your, like, I guess your signature pieces of work. We talked about a little bit about the Beneath the Remains thing. I mean, you were sent down there, or you were asked to go down by Tom and Jim?
No, Monty from Roadrunner. I mean, the story is everybody turned Sepultura down. Kunamati, Randy Burns, all the big name producers, because they were really too heavy and no one liked Max's vocals. That's why I'll go back to this, Jeff, is that we kind of were the stepchild of everybody. Listen, the bands did well, don't get me wrong. They were popular in an underground part, but no one ever thought that they would probably be accepted metal. Would you agree with that, David, at the time, that it was like a fringe?
Well, yeah, Sepultura was such an unknown quantity. I see some people in the chat talking about schizophrenia, and I think a lot of it had to do with how schizophrenia sounded. It was very rough and ragged, and the Cavallera brothers said the producers didn't understand how they sounded. So, and think of Sepultura at the time; they're a band from Brazil, sort of an exotic quantity, an unknown quantity at the time. So that's sort of how the buck got passed around and landed on Scott, and he jumped on it, and it changed his career. So it's hard to predict what Sepultura was going to become.
Correct, and there was no money involved, Jeff. I mean, most of the producers wanted money. No one, like you said, no one going to go to Brazil for Christmas, unknown quantity and things like that. And I mean, I'll be honest with you, they were just like, hey, Burns has been at the studio with Blash, Dan Johnson's bands and stuff like that. I mean, we have no one left. So I'm exaggerating a little, but at the same time I was the producer of Last Resort. But anyway, it was wonderful. I loved it. I was lucky. And at the time, like I said, no one, people listen, Borovoy Krin, you cannot give enough credit to that man for Blabbermouth. Borovoy, I still love you. Anyway, that people like him and Monty, who were really influential, Catherine Ludwig, people that really had faith in these bands, but they were in a position of somewhat power or whatever. Don Kay. I mean, there's some other guys, but like I said, they really had faith in these bands, And to them, it's a testament because look what happened to them. And like I said, his schizophrenia was killer. The Obituary guys, Executioner guys, we used to jam. They used to play them for me, and that's how I got turned on to them and jammed them. But they were really cool. But at the time, they were nobodies on the scene, right? They were really underground. I mean, if you were into underground metal, you liked them. But other than that, they were, you know what I mean? So we had a great time, and I'm super lucky. It was wonderful.
Yeah, I think I was reading. I remember talking to Doug Pinnick a while back, and we talked about Dogman, and that was a huge record for them, obviously. And Brendan O'Brien, I believe,
King's X.
Yeah, King's X, right? And
he's got the best.
Well, I was going to say, he talked about. I asked him what the budget on that album was, and it was just this fucking obscene number. I can't remember off the top of my hand, but I want to say it was like $600,000, I think, in that range. And that fucking Brendan O'Brien got like half that money. And I think it's really important to note in here that you didn't.
$600,000. All the bands I ever recorded weren't even close to $600,000.
Right, exactly. I think it's a very important point to make that in this book, it's pretty clear you're not up there with like Steve Jobs. You're not that kind of level of money, right? That you and Tom and those guys didn't get super fucking wealthy doing these albums, right? I mean, we're talking a lot of these deals were $5,000 to record an album, right? Which is
right.
Crazy.
Yeah, David will tell you what's the classic line?
You're like a pizza factory, right?
Bob Rock.
Yeah, you're not Bob Rock either, right? Yes.
You were the Domino's police pizza.
$600,000. Doug Pinnick, I love you. King's X was awesome. You're the stupidest motherfucker on the planet. Any band is the stupidest motherfucker on the planet to pay me or anybody $600,000. That's just stupid. Sorry, that's me. And excuse me.
How about Rick? I won't ask you your thoughts on Rick Rubin, but anyways, moving on.
Rick Rubin's great, but I'm saying it's the world I come in from. It's stupid. There's nobody worth that money. The band wrote the fucking songs. I didn't do anything. Whoever didn't do anything. If you can write the songs, then why the fuck do you need the band? So fuck everybody for charging how much money. Excuse me. That's ridiculous. And it's anyway, sorry.
I don't want to ruin it, but I will say in here, because I'm trying not to give away too much because we want people to buy it. And Scott just bought a copy, one of my guys in the chat here. But you gave points back on the 2 albums that you actually could have made money on, one of which was fairly successful. That kind of shows just the dedication you had to giving these hardworking guys, these young cats that, and not many of them were not a whole lot younger than you, but some of them were, to kind of get this product that was a saleable product. And you also worked very diligently when you believed in a band that was unsigned. You would make calls to some of your connections, and that, you can't understate that. David, any thoughts on that? I mean, just the way that kind of
didn't matter the size of the project. Scott was going to work extra hours for them regardless, and could have been as big as Cannibal. Could have been as small as a band who just did a 4-song demo that was 10 minutes long. Scott still put in the same amount of work and time and effort into all, which I think says a lot about him. And yeah, the points thing was a big one, because there are other producers of Scott's brethren who did take points and still accept points on it, and that's definitely their right to do so. There's nothing illegal about it, but Scott knew how little these bands were making, and didn't make any sense for Scott to take money off of them.
Listen, I'll say this. I'll go to this. The Warrant guys, who are very cool, came in to do that Black album after Cherry Pie, Morrisound.
Dog Eat Dog.
Dog Eat Dog.
I will admit, this was a shocker. I had no idea Warren fucking recorded down there. Go ahead, Scott.
No, listen, and they were very nice fellas, right?
Sure.
I didn't work with them. They came in with Wagner, David from
the German producer. Yeah.
They all sat around and they joked about how Wagner was going to make more money off the record than them. And that's all good. Listen, fellas, I mean, God bless you guys too. You're fucking stupid. It's your fucking song, right? You wrote the goddamn song. Why are you going to pay somebody else? I get it if somebody else has taken your song and rewritten it, if you're a pop star, but come on, man. You guys all end up fucking poor at the end of the day, right? And somebody gets rich off your music. That bothers me to my core, especially the type of music that I like. It's not about that.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I mean, yeah, you get into the whole streaming thing now, and this dude behind Spotify. Holy fuck! I mean, talk about stealing.
But that's, to me, that's a little different, Jeff, because that's just a machine out there. I'm saying is you're picking some guy and you're okay.
Yeah.
That guy's sitting there with you as your friend, telling you that he's more valuable than the songs that you wrote. How does that work? I don't get it. I mean, I don't mean to sound so animated about it, but how does it work when you wrote the goddamn songs and the producer is telling you, I deserve more money than you? I don't get it. But anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm old, done. But
hey, I got a question here, and it's this dude that I know. I kind of know him. I don't really know him really all that well, but he said, if you walked into Morrisounds as it was in, say, 91, would you have the recall? We know, actually, I think I'm going to let this guy ask you himself. So this guy, who's this guy?
Oh, man.
I don't know who the fuck this guy is. How'd you get in here, man? I don't know.
I snuck in. What's up, guys?
I wanted to surprise you a little bit, Scott. I thought it'd be kind of cool if Kelly jumped in a little bit towards you.
I love you.
How are you?
I'm all right.
I just saw David just a few weeks ago, but I haven't seen Scott in a long time.
Yeah.
It's good to see you. Yeah, that was my question, actually. I was just like wondering the other day, like, you know, if you walked into Morrisound as it was back in 91, what are your odds at being able to complete the session? Do you have that kind of recall?
Me walking in?
Yeah, like as it was in 91. Do you think you could remember all the things as they were? Because that's such a different way of recording than but it's the way you recorded everything. So like, would you remember all that stuff? Compression and EQs and running the console?
He's putting you on the spot, Scott. I'm just wondering.
Well, I think I could record.
I mean, obviously there'd be a little bit of a rust, but I mean, I if I'm a betting man, I put my money on the fact that you absolutely would just be like, all right, hang on. Yep, I got it. And you'd be back in that world in no time, as it was, everything as it was, like, you did it so much and so many times that there has to be some sort of recall there,
Sure, but there's no studios around that operate like that anymore. It's all, as we know from different things.
Yeah. I just wondered, just like, because playing guitar, like you have to, like, you recall things playing guitar, but I mean, you'd have to continuously. But the guitar stays the same though, so it's not like technology. But I mean, all the way that you made records is such an art form, that's like almost nobody does that anymore. But man, they should, like just that was really an art form. I was telling Jeff about the idea of cutting tape with a razor blade. If you think about editing your music, all you musicians out there, you think about I can't even imagine if you made the wrong cut, all of a sudden part of that performance is gone. I mean, it's fucking.
I think there's a story.
That's like surgery.
Isn't there a story that you tell in there, David, about that Scott tells about You lost a part of, what was it, a drum part from?
It was in Cannibal record. We won't still divulge too much, but Scott was cutting the tape, and surely this happened a few other times too that we did not put in the book. But Scott was cutting the tape, and he goofed, and the guys in Cannibal saw it, and Scott had a bit of a panicked moment, but he was able to put it all back together. And Scott gives a little tutorial on tape cutting, but anecdotally, I mean, Kelly even told me this too. Like, no one was better at cutting tape than Scott Burns. Like,
man, surgeon, a fucking surgeon.
Scott was exactly. I think that's your term there, Kelly. Scott was a surgeon at cutting tape, and the Cannibal guys said the same thing. They just sat there with their mouths open while Scott had reels of tape here cutting it, and it was almost always precise. So, but to Kelly's point, like, no one does that anymore. But Scott. Scott may doubt himself, but if you set up Morrisound as it was in 1991, and you had Atheist back in there recording and asked Scott to come in and say, "All right, Scott, here you go. Here's the old console and everything," it would just be like riding a bike.
I think it would. I think Scott would jump right back in.
But I think he could do it.
Yeah.
We lost Scott.
So he just left. He left the chat out of disgust for what we were saying about him.
Fuck you guys! I can't believe this.
Yeah,
come back, Scott. Come back, Scott. We
dare say those things about me.
How are you, David?
I'm good, Kelly. Nice. Yeah, I ran into Jeff. I saw Kelly a couple weeks ago at the Milwaukee Metal Fest, and they were absolutely fantastic. He's got a lot of young guys in his band who are even younger than I am, and they sounded great. And it was incredible. So
Kelly's like the den mother at Boy Scouts. He's got all the Boy Scouts around.
All my children.
The den dad, right?
Yes,
my prog metal children.
They do all the songs justice. As I Slay, Piece of Time. You name it.
It was a tough crowd, though. I'd love for you to be able to see us in a club, with like 800 people, where it's like really packed out, and there he is. He's like left in disgust.
We thought you got it. I was just about to ask you if you were back in 1991 redoing Atheist again. Would Kelly and Rand get along this time? Probably not. I'm guessing probably not. But
only if he brought that little crappy EQ pedal that he had. Remember that thing, Scott? God awful little. He had this horrible little Boss EQ pedal. Here we are with Mesa Boogie Mark IIIs. We rented them, and the great, very cool sounds. And he had to bring that shitty little pedal. He just always wanted his sound to be good for the leads, and he wasn't concerned about the rhythm. So much so that, if I'm not mistaken, I mean, I don't know if we talked about it in the book or not, but Scott switched his amp to my amp in order to get the rhythm tracks done, because he was such a pain in the ass to try to get a sound out of him, a rhythm sound that was different than solo. And as I recall, you used my amp settings and my amp, Scott, and finally just solved the problem. I don't even think he was aware of it until afterwards.
Right, I agree. I mean, and that was typical. Right? I mean, he was a lead player, right? I mean, you knew that, Kelly. I mean that, and that was like with Schaefer sometimes. That I mean, is some of the guys, like I said, is nowadays everybody is such a pro that you probably run into that less often. But back in the day, no one could hear shit. They just stood in front of their amp and said, "Oh, I think my sound's fucking great," when everybody else said sound is shit. So it was difficult, but what I mean? So right, Kelly. I mean, absolutely. And that was Rand. I mean, listen, the beauty of Rand was, he was unique. He flipped the guitar upside down, and when he bended and stuff like that, but certain things he definitely was difficult with. Absolutely.
Hey, do you know who I had a great conversation with just yesterday, or actually on Father's Day, was Rob Barrett. There's a great guitar player. I talked for like 45 minutes. We had this amazing chat. We've known each other for 30 years, but we've never had like a solid 45-minute, 50-minute conversation just about old times and about things. And obviously your name came up many times, Scott.
Hey, Scott, you're frozen. Your audio is
frozen in time.
You're frozen in time, just like
that is a piece of time, actually, fellas. That is one piece of time.
A piece of time, yes.
Maybe pop back out and pop back in. We'll try that. Just exit out and come back in.
But Barrett's great, man. I love him, and I was talking to him about new music and everything, and I was like, do you listen to any new bands at all? And he was like, no, bro. Priest, Maiden, Slayer, fucking, that's like, he doesn't even, I was like, all right, man. I said, all right, but from one old guy to another, I said, there's a lot of really great new music out there. I said, you have to, I was trying to pep him up for, because, I love that old school mentality about, nope, I don't need to hear anything else. Is he there? What?
Yeah, he's there, Scott. He's back.
Is he? Oh, there he is.
Wait, Scott, are you unfrozen? Talk a minute.
You still look frozen.
No, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah,
you're
all right. Well, at least we can hear you.
Camera's frozen. You might maybe just pop back out and pop back in. I won't keep you a whole lot longer, but
no worries. Hold on.
Am I messing this up? Maybe it's you. Oh, okay.
No. Kel, though, it's funny. I bring up bands to you all the time. You're like, I don't listen to that stuff anymore. So, I mean, weird. I know you do forage a little bit.
I listen to a lot of new music, but I don't go searching for, like, I don't go through demos trying to find new bands. Like, I don't, if I hear something on, whatever, cruising through social media, I mean, I love it when a new band is amazing. I love it when somebody is more, you know what I mean? Like, I prefer that, I mean, I'd rather, there was a saying that I heard the other day, if you find yourself to be the smartest person in the room, then go to a new room. I'm that way musically. I want to be around music that's way better than what I can do. You know what I mean? I want to hear that kind of shit. And so Scott, I really pursued
that same analogy a few minutes ago. Scott had the same analogy.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. About being the smartest guy in a room, or, how was it, Scott? You said,
trying to find a new room.
Smarter than the dumb room, right? I mean, you're going to learn something from smart people, right?
So
talk a little bit. Both you guys talk a little bit. Kel, we've talked about this a little bit, but Scott, I'd be interested in your take on David as well. There was a lot of support amongst the bands in that era, but there was a fairly healthy amount of competitiveness, right? Talk a little bit about that in terms of how you saw that, Scott, from the engineer and production seat, how you saw some of that stuff. Now, I do know, you do touch on this a little bit about Chuck and how Chuck didn't always have kind things to say about certain people. And I know that. Am I getting into territory I shouldn't, David? Should I stop?
Been covered.
No, but I don't want to I don't want to take over and give too much away out of the book.
No, that's fine, Jeff. But okay. Yes, there was always some, and this has been confirmed by a lot of people who are in the know, not just Kelly, is that Chuck had a little bit of jealousy towards Atheist and Cynic, more Atheist and Cynic, because Chuck was
worked with Paul.
Chuck basically saw the writing on the wall that death metal was starting to get more technical once the 90s happened, and he did not quite have the players yet. And here was Kelly and Atheist already several miles ahead of everybody with what they were doing. And, Chuck was a little insecure about himself at the time. So there were definitely some words, we won't dive too much into it because Kelly shared the story, as had Scott, but there were some words exchanged between Kelly and Chuck at certain points at Morrisound.
Like directly, Kel? I don't remember you telling me.
Oh, yeah, no. Yeah, very directly, like almost nose to nose in the lobby of Morrisound. But anyway, like, I think your question really kind of leans more towards, was it a spirited competitiveness back then? Yeah. And it was. I mean, listen, you're talking about Morbid Angel, Obituary, everybody's records coming out. 91 especially was a year that, Cause of Death, Unquestionable Presence, all these records came out at the same time. So when it came time to playing together, a little bit of that, that puffy chest came out, I mean, you just, I think human beings have a spirited sort of competitiveness about everything. That's why people love betting, I mean, so it was okay, but it was healthy.
You're all young kids too. I mean, you're just,
and we didn't know what we were fighting for, really, because it was a pretty unknown genre of music, except in our little clique. So, but I mean, amongst ourselves, we wanted it to be, you know, we wanted to have our fair shot. It was just, you know, a lot of times about how long we could play and how much stage we have. I mean, it was really that simple. You know, I mean, whoever's playing last, it would take the entire stage. And, you know, and then, so, you know, if you're opening, it was tough. And, you know, if you guys all had, everybody had records out at the same time, and everybody was so different too, right, Scott? I mean, it was like super, everybody had their own branch of the tree. You know, there's this big Tampa metal tree, and everybody had a branch, you know, and each branch was different. And so everybody wanted to be the main branch in the tree, of course. But it was really nice. I can remember the Tampa Bay Metal Awards happening, and MTV actually came and covered it and put it up. And that was a big fucking deal to us, you know. I mean, and we played that show, and we actually won you know, an award for that, and that was really, really nice. And so, I mean, when little things like that happen in the scene, it was nice. You know, you wanted to be, you know, acknowledged. And back then, it was all about getting a good review from Boy Crin.
Well, let me interject for a sec here, Scott. Were you hearing a lot of bitching and complaining amongst the various different guys coming into you going, that fucking guy? Did you get a lot of that, or was it fairly uniformly cool? And I'm not really speaking about Chuck here. I'm talking about all bands that you dealt with.
I think, I mean, Kelly, you say what you think is, but I think in the beginning, in the studio days and in the demo days, when everybody was playing and recording and getting their deal and getting signed and stuff, everybody, like Kelly said, was pretty much on the same page. Now, everybody was like, hey, does that guy cheat, or does that guy like fucking play like shit? That was all machismo stuff like that. Sure, everybody wanted to make sure that everybody was good. But at the same time, I think all the bands were on the same page. It was like, oh, this guy's a killer, or whatever. Now, perhaps, I think it started to show its head more when they got signed than they went on tour. Like when fucking you guys, you got stuck with Cannibal? Or who did you guys get first?
Yeah, that was the tour. Yeah, touring for us and Cynic was tough. There was nobody for us to tour with, you know. But I think Scott, you know, I think you probably got a lot of, you know, there was also camaraderie. You know, I can remember many times sitting in a session with Scott and just talking about Sean Reiner. Like, wow, isn't that kid is fucking amazing, you know. And we would, you know, that's some of my favorite times about recording records with you, Scott, is being able to just talk shop, just locker room talk, you know, just real
if I
fucking.
Can interject for a sec, Kelly, that's another really cool point in the book, and you have to read it throughout because it's kind of a running thread that these were open sessions a lot of the time, and a lot of you guys that were local would just kind of go to other band sessions, or you'd learn that Sepultura was in town, or Gorguts was in town, or whoever, you know, bigger band like some Suffo or something like that, Kelly, right? With
that's how the Sepultura, that's how the backing vocals on the Stronger Than Hate, after Scott actually hooked that up for me to write those lyrics. I came up to the studio, and John Tardy was there, and the guys from Incubus, the original Incubus, the metal band. And we just all happened to be in the studio that day, so we all did those backup vocals on the gang vocals on Stronger Than Hate.
Yeah.
And then that probably happened a lot. I know that Possessed came to town, the Obituary guys came. I mean, that always was. I mean, I can remember on 2 occasions getting caught smoking weed in the guitar booth by Jim Morris, you know, and that was like getting scolded. It was like getting caught by your father.
How'd that go?
Well, here's why it was really bad. No. I love Jim and Tom. It was, and I look back as a grown man, like I feel like an asshole. He was courting a very high dollar account, you know, and he was showing him the studio, and there we were, like Spicoli and the gang, fucking just blazing out in the guitar booth. This guy's trying to run a fucking business, you know, and he's, you know, he was kind enough to let all of these death metal fucking people, you know, that wasn't right, Scott. I mean, that wasn't their original intention, was to have all these scrubby ass fucking death metal people.
You know, different clientele, right? Absolutely different clientele. But I think the point was, it was difficult when everybody got signed. Is like you said, I don't know who toured with who, but sometimes the tours didn't go well. And listen, to be honest with you, bands like Atheist and bands like Cynic, they weren't as, even though, I mean, we look at them now as classic bands, right? Stuff like that. when they first came out, they were more of an acquired flavor. Would you agree, Kelly?
Oh, 100%. I mean,
not
to
easily
all, really.
palatable. Not
So-
easily
To a detriment. I mean, to a detriment, absolute detriment to our abilities to tour with anybody. I mean, it was just not, even fans. I mean, it was just really that difficult. I know there's probably somebody sitting out there watching my interviews that just go, please stop talking about it. But, I mean, it is part of the charm of how Cynic and Atheist are still here all these years later.
Right. I mean, and that's an honest assessment. And I think that's when more, Jeff, what your point is this is in the beginning, everybody got, like I said, it's not everybody still got along, but it was easier in the beginning when everybody was recording. Everybody's like, dude, did you hear that Atheist versus Killer or Cynic riff or Cannibal Mother? But when they got signed, then then the label, I'll say this, then the label, whoever label it is, they're pushing it and they're doing whatever and who's selling whatever. But at the same time is then when you put somebody on tour and whatever but it was rough because it takes a long time for people to realize that progressive ideas were as cool as straight ahead death metal stuff. I mean, it just wasn't the case, right or wrong, right? Those guys.
It's like Bathory back in the day, man. I mean, nobody except for a very small cult group of people got that shit, and now it's huge. You see, Kim Kardashian walking around in a Bathory shirt. She doesn't know who Bathory is, but let's be honest. But I mean, it's like a fashion statement thing, but it wasn't that way with all of you guys. I guess, Scott, you brought it up with, once he got signed, was there Kelly, I don't know if I've ever asked you this. Was there this kind of mad rush because I don't remember a lot of these bands touring much back then, probably in Europe more so than the States, but I don't ever remember Cynic coming around to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania back in the 80s.
Yeah, they toured with Cannibal Corpse and we toured with Cannibal. That was the thing we had in common, was probably the last band we should have ever toured with, both of our bands, was Cannibal Corpse. That was the most, other than Candlemass, we did a tour with Candlemass. So that's also on the opposite end of everything that we are. And it's, again, no disrespect to either one of those bands. They're both brilliant in their own right. But I mean, we just didn't fit in, and neither did Cynic. And so those were the first tours for both of our bands. And so it's kind of a common thing. Me and Paul, as friends for decades, talk about that often, how, it was like being an opening act on a stand-up comedian tour.
Yeah.
It was like really fucking hard. And so, but these days now there's just endless possibilities. So it's just, it sounds like old guy fucking fodder, to say, oh, back in the day it was fucking really hard, but it really was fucking hard. It was, there was really nowhere for us to go. Anywhere we went, we were always going to be up against fucking super fast, crazy knuckle dragon shit, that was like the flavor of the day. Everybody loved, and we did too. We loved a lot of that stuff too, but it was just difficult to blend in. So, but again, another testament to here we are in 2024, and both Cynic and Atheist band, that music matters to a new generation. So it was worth a fight.
Kelly, you said this to me. You attribute. I don't know if success is the right word, but maybe some of the staying power to those early recordings that you did with Scott. You have such a reverential way of talking about him, which is super cool.
Of course. I think that's like water is wet. Of course, Scott Burns is important to to all of our careers on a level that I can never possibly explain. So, and it's just fun to be older and look back on it, isn't it, Scott? Just to look back on, because when you're in it, and it's like, oh, we got 7 days to finish Piece of Time. Like, fuck, it's hard to fucking get it. And that record doesn't get done without Scott. We talked about that in the book as well. It's just a lot of records don't get done. A lot of things that we consider history now do not happen without the man that's on this podcast right now. Wow. They just don't happen, and whoever, I don't know, I don't think you were married at the time. I'm not sure if you I can't remember whether you had a girl, whether your wife was your girlfriend or what, but bless her heart, you were never fucking home, man. You were like always at that studio. So I don't know how you had a personal life back then, but yeah, crazy.
I think the thing too, Jeff, is to remember is that like back in the day, if you got 500 people at a show, that was a lot of people.
A lot of people, yeah.
Europe was, I mean, Kelly, you helped me out because, you know, but in Europe it was different. But like I said, that, you know, people were digging Anthrax and Testament and Overkill, obviously Slayer, Metallica and stuff. All due respect to those bands, we were like the fucking stepchild, the underground. No one ever thought anything. And then take a step below that. I mean, so you had Corpse, Morbid Angel, I guess, Sepultura or whatever. Then you had technical bands, like you said, like Atheist, Cynic. Those were below them as far as now. The press loved them. The musicians loved them. They were loved. But fan-wise, it was different. So, like I said, is to Kelly's point was not to belabor it, but nowadays everybody looks back with rose-colored glasses and says, "Oh, everything's fucking." But it was like David said in the book is, you know, now we just talk about metal, right? But back in the day, it wasn't just metal. It was different types of metal, and some things were, you know what I mean? It was okay metal, and then not, you know what I mean? David, you jump in there, but I don't know.
No, you're totally right. I think you hit the nail on the head, and Kelly can attest to this firsthand. Was he had the levels of the popular death metal bands like Morbid Angel and Death, you know, that level, but the technical bands that were doing stuff that no one quite understood at the time. You know, Kelly told me stories.
But even Morbid Angel and Death had a very hard time in the beginning. So there's really a separation of church and state with thrash metal movement, because that was the first thing that caught the attention of the industry, was like Metallica, Anthrax, Overkill, you know, thrash metal, where it wasn't too fucking crazy. But then all of a sudden this Tampa thing happened, and where you've got all, you know, you've got Morbid Angel. I mean, just the name, Obituary, that definitely was scary. And it's funny that people love horror movies. You would think that they would have embraced it the same way that they did a horror movie, but they didn't. They actually, Geraldo did a special about death metal. I don't know if you remember that, Scott, or not, but you know, and they came to Janus Landing in St. Petersburg, where we all are, where we live, me and Scott. And Geraldo did a show at a King Diamond show, and he interviewed everybody there and was trying to make everybody out to be Satanists.
But here's a really interesting thought exercise. Think about this. When I saw Ozzy on the Ultimate Sin tour, you know who opened for him? The first leg, Metallica. And the album that they were promoting was "And Justice for All," and I kind of just knew them. I was still again into. Damn,
you relate to the show. Holy shit.
No, I knew about these bands, but I'm saying that you give me.
You just got into Metallica and Injustice for All.
No, I knew about them with Ride the Lightning, but I didn't like. It was more important to sit out in the parking lot and get fucking loaded to go in to see Ozzy, and I only caught the last two songs. I'm like, wait, this fucking band's really good. I didn't actually own them, but could you imagine? Imagine for a second. You know, and again, like I saw Monsters of Rock in '88. Fucking Metallica was the second band behind Kingdom Come, and Dokken was over them. Okay, think about that for a second. Could you imagine?
Think about it. We lived through it. We saw it.
But could you imagine Cannibal opening for Ozzy or Atheist opening for Ozzy? It just wasn't going to happen back then. It wasn't.
Well, it doesn't happen now. Slipknot doesn't have Atheist open for them.
Well,
you know, Slipknot should absolutely 100% be fucking taking death metal bands out on the road with them, but they do not. You know, I mean, but they should, because they owe everything to death metal. Listen, a lot of very, very successful extreme metal bands that are selling, or hitting, millions of streams and stuff, owe a lot to, me and Barrett were talking about this the other night. Like, man, come on now. You can't be Slipknot, pretend like you're the one that created the wheel. You know, I mean, like you threw on some masks and shit, but I would, if I was in their position, I would 100% want to go back and and pull everybody up on the boat, man, and be like, yes, we fucking did it. We finally opened everybody's eyes. There used to be a time when just to go was fucking, you might as well just cancel your contract. Those kinds of vocals, as soon as I hear that, it's over. It's over.
Absolutely. I mean, Kel, I told you this. I knew about all the early death metal because of Kerrang. I was reading about it all the time, and I was trying to check it out when I could, where I could, and I was like, fuck, man, the music is killer, but those fucking vocals suck. God, they're awful.
Yeah, well, and so did Don Dokken. So fuck Don Dokken. He's
easy, pal. Don't jump on my Don Dokken. I love that guy. Anyway, the point what I was getting at was that it was not an easily digestible thing. Yeah. So you guys were fighting upstream all the time.
Absolutely, 100%. Listen, no one gave a fuck about any of the bands I did or the bands unless you were really into the underground. Listen, not to say this, when I left, no one gave a fuck about death metal. You couldn't give me if I gave you $5, I couldn't get a band to fucking record with me unless they were death metal. Everyone, it was the worst time ever. No one gave a fuck about death metal unless they liked death metal. And now everybody's okay with death metal. I mean, look, what's the big Swedish band that just Amant or whatever?
Amant, yeah.
They're fucking King Diamond with a death metal vocalist, and they're cool. Don't get me wrong, but nobody would have fucking ever. I mean, years ago, no one would have thought anything with those vocals, right? I just mean, Lamb of God, anything. Who would have ever thought that heavy, brutal, guttural vocals would be cool in 2025?
Yeah.
When I left in '97,
not only is it cool, but again, back to the Bear conversation. They just played a Monomarth, Cannibal Corpse, Obituary, I think Frozen Soul. They just played Red Rocks. I mean, Scott, can you imagine in 1991 going, one day Cannibal Corpse is going to fucking play fucking Red Rocks. Like, what? Right. I saw you too at Red Rocks. Like, I remember that shit from back in the day. Like a death metal, a whole package, and not just play it, but fill it. They did a really good job of putting a lot of people in there. So it's just unheard of, the way this music has grown and the appreciation now. And I don't think that the average 23-year-old can really understand just how lucky they are to be in this landscape compared to the origins of this music, and it would just be nice to see some of the modern successful extreme metal bands, as they like to call themselves, just throw back, man, and fucking throw a life vest out there and fucking take some of these bands out on the road with you. You know what I mean? It's only going to lend you your street cred anyway. And a lot of the people that are coming to see you would love to fucking see, more underground bands play. I mean, I think Obituary and Cannibal Corpse have proven that you can play large arenas and really be that music is, and that's what we all dreamed of when we were kids. Like, imagine how heavy this song is. Imagine if we got to play Madison Square Garden. Imagine with this massive PA system, and that's all of our dreams. So I'm just so happy for Cannibal Corpse and Barrett and all those guys, because they they fucking stuck it out, and now they're playing these huge fucking arenas, so that was pretty unheard of, in this day and age. There's nobody back from that era that ever thought that it would get to this level. So, but again, lending to the point of, just how difficult it was back then. It was certainly, when Scott talks about the rose-colored glasses, that's how people look at it today. But
yeah,
it couldn't have been more like shit-covered glasses back then. It was just really, really difficult. And, a guy like Scott with all that ability and all that talent to say, all right, listen, I want to go off and do a different kind of record. Oh, no.
Hang on. I wanted to get into that, actually, Kelly, before you go there, because I'm going to get you guys out of here in like 13 minutes. Sound good? I'll get you out on the 2-hour mark. I promised Kelly, I'm not going to keep it more than an hour and a half. He's like, you better not. So I promised
to
get out of here at 10. But Scott, one of the things I kept thinking about, and you brought it up, was you couldn't buy a production job that wasn't a death metal band towards the end of your career. Do you ever feel in any way, shape, or form, kind of, for lack of a better way of putting it, cheated that maybe you weren't given some other opportunities to do other things? And I will bring up one record and one band actually that maybe does fall a little outside that line. One of my favorite bands. I love this band, and this was, one that you had a mark in, and it could be a clear sort of like, I mean, you can definitely hear atheist sort of vibes in this in terms of the technical stuff, but it wasn't maybe as difficult to get your head around as some of the atheist stuff is.
Spit it out.
Proggy. Look at that. He gives me shit about Dokken, and now I bring it up. He's like, fuck you. Anyway, talk about this band and this album, but also answer that question whether you ever felt cheated that you didn't get an opportunity to do something more mainstream.
Prophetic Willis is killer. Met them through Chuck and DeGiorgio and Gene, Melt the Milky Big Bar, and they're killer. And I'm super lucky. I love Dan Rock. I love Brian. I love Norm, Ward, Buddy. They were awesome. It was amazing. But as far as being cheated, no. I mean, like David said, look, there are times when I told some bands that I didn't want to do anything. I was happy doing death metal at the time, but at the same time is at the end, when I wanted to try and do something, just record other stuff, no one wanted to, and that's okay, right? I mean, like, no, I don't feel cheated, but at the same time it goes to Kelly's point is that back in the day, I'll always say this: people hire a producer for two reasons and two reasons only. Either you recorded their favorite album, the band says, I love that album. The Who's a producer, right? They don't know what you are, but they love the album. Or the record label says, this guy's fucking cool, you're going to use it. So if you were death metal in 1997, 1998, no one's going to hire you except another death metal band because no record label in the world thought death metal was cool. And so that's it. And it's okay.
You were kind of typecast in a weird sort of way if you took it like an actor's kind of vibe out of it. Yeah,
I was working like an Italian mobster and fucking, come on. Yeah, it's okay. I mean, but no. I mean, I said this. The idea with Morrisound too, it would have been nice. I just liked music, and to have, like, when Warren came in, listen, those guys were fucking cool, man. I'm not a Warren fan or whatever, but it was cool to see them record. They're professional. They were trying to do an album that was, like Kelly said, their vision to be in fucking Madison Square Garden. It's what every band wants to fucking do, right? Is to be band, have people cheer for them. So I was okay with, like I said, it's just being an engineer. But at the same time, it didn't work out for me, and I was okay with it, right? I had fun, proud of what I did, but there's no regrets.
David, any thoughts on that?
I think Scott summed it up well. It was hard hearing him share some of his experiences near the mid to late 90s when he hired a manager and she was trying to get him work with some of the major labels, and he ended up with some cool remix jobs that were very much well appreciated. The bands loved working with him, but yeah, I mean, it was tough. Think about, and Kelly knows this too, think about death metal mid to late 90s. That was probably the lowest mark for death metal. Yeah, I mean,
all metal was kind of dying around.
Yeah, all metal. All metal.
Pantera was about the only band that was still maintained, kept it alive.
Think of being a death metal band, like Scott says. So it was a really hard period, but everyone made it through, and you guys brought up some great points about the state of it today in 2024. It is really crazy about the Amon Amarth tour playing Red Rocks and selling out all these arenas. It's remarkable, but
it really is.
It's kind of thriving in a lot of ways. I mean, granted, Cannibal's kind of I don't want to say the exception, but they're one of the exceptional bands that came out of the Tampa scene that could really. Because I'll tell you what, I saw Morbid Angel back in 2013. There wasn't more than 300 people at the show, and this was of course the Illud Divinum period, which was kind of not a very well received album. But I mean, but it is kind of crazy to see for example, Kelly and I were both, well, David, you too, were at Milwaukee Metal Fest and MDF, and it was just like, I was walking around MDF like a kid in a candy store. Like, you gotta be fucking kidding me, man.
Oh.
All these killer bands here. Most of the musicians
Amazing.
are out amongst the people just talking and being cool. And you're like, wait, what the hell? This just doesn't make any sense. It's like a different reality, right?
Yeah, that's only like 15% of a European festival. You know, European festival blow your fucking mind. It's like an entire town that agrees with the music that you love. You know, it's like everywhere you go, everyone agrees with your music style. It's a pretty cool fucking social experiment. To go to like Boston or Hellfest.
I wish I could do that, but you know, I have some limitations.
Yeah, it's definitely, I recommend anybody that can should definitely go to a European festival, because that's when you really see what metal matters. You know, what metal has done and how it could be. It's almost like the legalization of marijuana, how we used to look at it here in America. We used to look at Holland like, wow, man, I can't wait to go to Holland so I can get some pot and smoke pot legally.
And now it's
like when you go to Europe and you go into a store and they literally have metal magazines right at the point of purchase. Like, you know what I mean? Like metal. And then every commercial, like not every commercial, but a lot, probably 60% of the commercials have metal music in them, like for Crest.
Wow.
Paste and for Ricola, they had a black metal commercial for Ricola where the guy was trying to sing. He was trying to go, ugh. And he was like, they were like, oh man, here, take this Ricola, and he was like, Ricola, you know, like, and I was like, holy shit, that's a legit mainstream commercial in fucking Sweden or Norway, you know what I mean? Like, so it's kind of cool to go over there and see how it could be here if everybody would just fucking lighten up. You know, and with
that around, and you know that.
Yeah, it might. You know, never say never.
Yeah, the political climate's not aiming that direction, but we'll move on. You real quick here. There was a big gig, and this is the first I read about. Was in the book, David. And we'll tie up here in a moment. There was a big gig at like a military base. Kelly, I think you were involved in that. I don't think you ever told me about that, right? DSI was there. How many other? There was a bunch of other bands. Scott, what do you remember about that? Was this the one you were running sound for DSI and Glenn snarled at you? Was that the deal, or was that a different gig?
Well, they were called Amon then, right?
Oh, yeah. Scott? Yeah, I mean, is that the one with like Nocturnus and
Yeah.
No. I mean, that was like the first time that I guess DSI and Amon had played out, and it was some weird place like an A-frame. You were there, Kelly, right, or something?
Yeah, it was the Fort Homer Hesterly Armory, I think is what it was.
Sure, yeah, but yeah, so you know, yeah, it was a good show. It's, like I said, back in the day, it was good. Everybody would come out, and it was a fun time and stuff like that. I mean, I can remember to be honest, when Executioner put on a better show than Death. You know, at the Brass Mug. When, you know, they would do Smoke Bombs and Spanish Moss, and nothing against Chuck and Death back then, but that's, like I said, is everybody was into it and trying to put on a good show and stuff like that, and all the bands were good. And
what was really cool also about Obituary, and I can say this just from another guy in a band, and you know, it's like playing football. You go to high school football, you play different teams in different cities, and you see, you know, one star player on another team and yada yada. But I mean, so back in the day, it was all about imagery. It was all about looking the part. Kind of, that was a big deal in the early days, was that shock factor. And so you have a guy like Trevor from Obituary who literally looks like somebody just dug him up out of the grave.
Yeah.
And he was just and like, I remember us all being mesmerized by him. Like, they're so lucky to have this dude. He literally looks like a fucking corpse. He doesn't have any makeup on, and he's killer. And then John Tardy, John Tardy made everybody envious. Like, all death metal singers watched Tardy and were just like, God damn. You know, because he was the man. You know, I mean, there was really, and he still is. You know, he still is pound for pound as good as any death metal vocalist alive or that has been alive. I mean, he's just consistent, and he just has a unique, like, when you hear Tardy, you know that's Tardy. That's really hard to do in this day and age. You know, and there's only a handful of guys that have that signature. So back then, you know, we really kind of. So that competitiveness, you know, we've got to either write something heavier, or we got to try to look fucking more evil, or we got to write songs that are more like, it was just that kind of, you know, young boy shit, you know, but it ended up being this thing, you know, that you look back on as a 50-plus-year-old man and go, that was fucking cool. I mean, everybody's really just trying to shine, and we were all pushing each other from one zip code, so to speak, and that's kind of unusual for that to happen. And it's really only been a handful of other occurrences like that in music, obviously on much larger levels, Seattle and stuff.
Kind of
but
funny you mentioned that. Let me blow this up a minute. I'm gonna hang on and see if I can figure out how to do this here. You mentioned Perez looking like a cadaver. If you look at that picture of him down there, he literally looks like he's got makeup on his eyes, but that's not makeup. That's how he looks.
He's always looked that way. And I mean, and he still looks
I
great.
thought it was all the weed. I just figured it was all the weed. I didn't really know.
Had permanent black circles under his eyes, and it was just ideal for death metal.
All right, speaking of weed, we're going to tie up here. I want to do a couple quick things. Number one, David, mention your other books so that other people know. I did notice there's 2 of them out of print or just sold out.
The first one I did was on Noise Records. That one's on Amazon. The second one was on Paradise Lost. That is sold out.
Right.
The third one I did, which is how I met Scott, is the obituary book, and then there's Scott's book.
I think the first 2 are sold out right now, though, right? Oh, you said one's on Amazon, on Kindle?
Yeah, the Noise book is on Amazon, but yeah, the Paradise Lost book is sold out. That was through Decibel.
Can you get a hard copy of the Noise one or no?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. Yes. Yep.
Any plans to reissue the Paradise Lost one?
Not that I know of right now.
And those well, we just said where you can find them. There is a link in the description for the book here. Kelly, what do you got going on, man? You're working on material, right?
Working on new Atheist material, yeah. Just we're like 4 songs in, and when we were in Milwaukee, we rented a rehearsal spot. We had a day off in between festivals, and we wrote a really cool song. So we've demoed 4 songs so far that are super fun and super interesting and exciting. And so we're just trying to tie up some legalities with our current contract issue. And then once we get past that, we'll be ready to go. We'll have all the music ready to go. And I've got a lot of new Till the Dirt stuff that I put together. And
yeah, we should mention that. You and Scott kind of came back into touch after years of not being in touch, I guess. Because of Till the Dirt, Kelly. Scott, you want to tell that from your perspective?
Well, we talked about it.
I mean, listen, Kelly is a great songwriter.
Did Kelly owe you some money or something? I just want to make sure that's not a...
No, what does that mean? So I think we first got in touch when Sean Reiner about talking about Sean passing away from Cynic. But anyway, then he sent me some songs, and I thought they're amazing. It was during COVID, and everything was locked down and stuff like that. And I think that Till the Dirt album is amazing. I mean, he went and got signed by Nuclear Blast, which was awesome because Tim and I were just going to put something out because of the time. There was nothing going on. But I'm going to ask you, Kelly. He's a prolific songwriter, Kelly is. They're great songs. We have a bank of other great songs. And I think it's a testament to him. You know what I mean? Forget about Atheist. I mean, on its own. But I mean, Till the Dirt is nothing like Atheist. If you listen to that, Till the Dirt, I don't think, this is my opinion, I don't think you'd ever say that sounds like Atheist. I think those are just great songs that he wrote. And I was going to say is I hope there's another Till the Dirt album.
Yeah. Listen,
he's got a new guitar he can use, right, Cal? You got a new guitar, right?
Yeah. I mean, me and Scott, we talked for several times a week for a couple of years, and we haven't had a chance to catch up. But yeah, I got a lot of great stuff. I can't wait to send you, Scott, and just to get to get
Absolutely.
that burned opinion, and just that guidance. I mean, without it, you got to have somebody like cheering you on, and somebody that you can trust. And that's what it became with Till the Dirt. It was just unknown. I definitely didn't plan on putting a band together or any of that shit. And me and Scott and Tim went through a number of different scenarios of how do we best get this out, because the songs were good and everything, but this industry is so fucking hard. Nobody wants to hear a solo record from you. I mean, even if you're a platinum selling artist, the guys in Slipknot weren't able to release solo records other than Corey. I mean, so there's a lot of strategy involved, and Scott was just super integral in all of that. And just in helping me believe in, because as an artist, the last thing you do is believe in yourself. You doubt everything. God, I don't know. You do that. So you got to have somebody in your corner that goes, listen, just, I can't tell you how many times Scott said, dude, they're good songs. Just fucking take a breath and fucking. But we went through a lot of shit just to get it to nuclear blast, you know. And I love Scott for it, and you know, I'll always, you know, that record is a snapshot in a unique time in all of our lives because of COVID and everything. But the greatest thing about it for me was it rekindled my friendship with Scott Burns, you know what I mean? And so I won't let that fucking fire go out until I'm dead and gone.
All right, two last things.
You write great songs. So yeah.
Go ahead, Scott. Sorry.
No, he writes great songs, but I hope anyway. But you know, I appreciate anyway. I'll just say this. I hope we had a good time tonight, and thank you. And Kelly, it was wonderful to see you. I'll give you a call this week.
Okay.
And David, you know, and Jeff.
Hang on.
The important thing is just quick is that, look, no matter what it's people still like metal. And now, like David said to me, is that people just enjoy metal and they don't categorize it as much as they used to when we were younger. And so it's all good, right? I mean, and that's the best part about it, right, David, is that there's not as much stigma and whatever. There'll always be some, but just everybody says, hey, I like this band. So it's getting better and better every day.
So I got two last things to hit on. One, how many metric kilos of weed were smoked at Morrisound back in the day? Can you guys guess? I have a jar over here.
I have a great answer for you. Exactly enough to create a classic kind of music that lasted 3 decades. That's how much.
All right, the last thing we're going to go out on here real quick is I have a little something I want to share with you guys. Okay.
Oh my God.
All right, you ready? Here we go. Scott Burns, funny voice.
Jack Owens. Oh my rock.
Scott Burns. Now listen up.
Scott Burns. Dude.
Dude, stop.
Classic Scott Burns. He says that about everything. He'll push the stop on the course. Dude, I'm not saying. I mean, you know,
I'm not saying.
I remember hearing basically
hang on,
Scott walk outside the studio, sit on the deck, and scream at the top of his lungs for minutes at a time.
He came out here and he was like, "Excuse me, guys." He closed the door and he went, "Fuck," real loud. I don't know what he was mad about, but
probably something I said.
Probably me annoying him. He just had to relieve himself from some frustration.
your face there was like, what the fuck, man?
That's great.
I thought that would be a funny way to end things. I found some great stuff back there, stuff with Kelly. I mean, that's another thing. There's some great in the studio footage out there, Scott. Have you ever gone out and looked for it? Have you watched any of that stuff?
I try not to, but thank you. It was overwhelming for me, Jeff, that everybody does a good Scott Burns impersonation. It's very true, and so I apologize, but that was me. And yes, I live with that. So yes, thank you.
Listen up, everybody. Go buy this book. It fucking rules.
Yes, it does.
It's one of these books that when you start reading it, you don't want to go to sleep. You want to keep reading it if you're a nerdy metal fucking weirdo like I am. So it's very much where the David yeoman's work, dude. You did a fucking amazing job. I don't have your other books, so I got to go out and get those now. Right. So again, like I said, costing me lots of money here, but yeah, man, you know, this is good stuff. Any final words, David, real quick?
No, just thanks for having us, Jeff. Hope we can do it again sometime. Always great to see Scott's smiling face. Kelly, I just saw your smiling face a few weeks ago, but great to see you again.
Love you guys.
And yeah, we'll chat again soon.
Kelly,
Scott,
I'll be talking to you. I love you. I'll be talking to you soon, brother. Scott, I'm gonna let you have the last word.
No, Jeff, thank you very much. Everybody check out Till the Dirt. Everybody knows Atheist. And David, I can never thank you enough. I love you guys. But really, all the bands, it really is about the band. So thank you very much.
Love you, man.
Hang on, guys. Don't go anywhere. Hang on. Oh, he left. They left.
Scott left.
Dave, it's you and me, David. Sorry. Thank you very much for doing this.
Thanks
Really
for having us,
appreciate
Jeff.
it.
This was a great chat.
We'll catch up at some point in time. I'm sure I'll maybe see it. Do you ever come out this way? You probably don't come out to Philly, do you?
I usually come out to Philly sometimes. Anytime Decibel's having stuff.
Well, are you going to come to that thing in August?
Maybe the
autopsy
headline. Possibly. We'll see. Yeah. I'll let you know if I do.
Yeah, let me know. Hit me up, man. You got my number. So everybody, thanks for jumping in tonight. We really appreciate it. Go buy this guy's book. He's fucking really great writer. Scott's a great dude. And so there you go.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Jeff. I appreciate it.
All right, man. Take care. Later.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Peace.